Hello everyone, Jay here with an ontological style argument for polytheism. There are many ontological arguments for the existence of God, one of which is essentially there is some possible world in which God exists, anything that is necessary exists in all possible worlds, therefore God, being a necessary being, exists in all possible worlds, therefore God exists. I'm not going to defend that argument or any other argument for God in this video. The argument I am presenting will start with the assumption that the existence of a necessary being has already been established. It's essentially an argument for the monotheist versus polytheist debate, not the atheist versus theist debate. So let's get started. Assumption: there exists at least one necessary being. Premise 1. There is a possible world in which many necessary beings exist. Premise 2. Any necessary being cannot fail to exist in all possible worlds. Conclusion: therefore, there are many necessary beings in every possible world. Therefore, there are many necessary beings in the real world, and thus polytheism is true. Of course, the contention will be on whether premise 1 is true. A monotheist could simply say that there are no possible worlds with more than one necessary being. To do that, however, would require defining the concept of a necessary being in such a way that there is only one such way for a being to be necessary. Personally, I disagree with that, but even if we grant that to the monotheist, there is yet another issue. Premise 1 being false, given the assumption that there does exist at least one necessary being, necessitates that the principle of identity of indiscernibles is true, which likely is not the case. The principle of identity of indiscernibles, or the PII as I will use it for the rest of the video, states that there cannot be separate objects or entities that have all their properties in common. If there is only one way for a being to be necessary, then that means that multiple necessary beings would have all their properties in common, which violates the PII. The channel Dr. Bauer's Office Hours has a fantastic video going over the PII, linked in the description below, but I will still give my best go explaining why it is false here, or at least likely false. Historically, philosophers like Max Black have already given us reason to doubt that the PII is true. Max Black asks us to imagine a universe containing nothing but two exactly resembling spheres. In such a completely symmetrical universe, the two spheres would be indiscernible from each other. While some of his critics have pointed out that such a completely symmetrical situation of two spheres could be reinterpreted as one sphere in a non-Euclidean space, it opens up the doors for more thought experiments. For example, let's say that one of these spheres has an accidental property of being scratched, while the other does not. That difference alone differentiates them, and shows that there are two separate spheres. But the scratch is not a necessary feature of the sphere. That means that in some possible world, there is a sphere that is not actually scratched. That leaves us with two exactly resembling spheres again in that possible world, which violates the PII. We could also instead imagine a universe with three identical spheres arranged in a line. The two on the outside the same distance from the middle as each other. Like with the earlier example, the two outside spheres will be identical, so the PII suggests that we say they should be reinterpreted as one sphere in a non-Euclidean space. The problem here is that brings us to this universe again being two spheres that are identical to each other, because the third one in the middle now is just a second identical sphere, but it was clearly distinguished from the other two, it seemed, by a relational property. These thought experiments already gave us plenty of reason to think the PII was false. But matters get even worse when we consider elements of quantum physics. Quantum mechanics already includes violations of the PII. To quote from the book Identity in Physics, a historical, philosophical, and formal analysis, It is not the case that in practice we cannot distinguish between two photons, but rather that there is nothing in principle which can serve to individuate them. Furthermore, the photons existing in mode P are not identical to the ones before or after, and are excitation of the same field mode, and possess all properties in common, yet are numerically distinct. PII is violated. This means that we not only have the thought experiments of philosophers like Max Black to cause us to doubt the PII, but even scientific inquiry into quantum physics brings it into doubt. Going back to the argument that this video is talking about, this leaves us with no good reason to doubt that premise 1 is true. Even if we grant that there is only one way for a being to be necessary, which I don't believe we have a good reason to do so, without the PII, we still end up with a possible world with many necessary beings, which leads us to conclude that polytheism is, in fact, true.